Be a friend to the end. A couple of years ago, I flew back to be with my father, who was dying. My sister was with him and had told me it's time to get back. Time was of the essence if I wanted to spend time with him. The care center he was staying at was right across the street from the retirement community where my mother and him both lived, and my mother was still living there. I spent the final 3 days with my father, primarily at his bedside, offering support physically and emotionally to the best of my skills. It was very emotional and difficult, and I learned about the distinction between being there and being present with him as opposed to just doing and trying to help him physically and emotionally. Fortunately, I'd studied death and dying for much of my life, and that had really deepened in the final decade of my father's life due to his 20 years of hospice work and me learning from his work, being with over 50 patients who had died that he'd spent time very closely with supporting. During my final week with my father, one evening my mother organized a wonderful dinner and gathering of many of my father's friends. My father was a very charismatic man, as was evidenced in his memorial the final year with the large turnout. The dinner was wonderful. We spent time with old family and friends I hadn't seen for a decade or two. And after the dinner, the conversation continued, but nobody breached the topic of visiting my father across the street and being a friend to the end. I unexpectedly and intuitively just got up and realized I needed to leave that group and get back over to my father with the limited amount of time that I had to spend with him. And so I walked across the street, sat down to his bed, and he opened his eyes, and we had a nice conversation about the people so dear to him right across the street that he'd known for 50 and 60 years. Um, but as I mentioned, no one had inquired about coming across the street and spending some final moments with my father. That was very disturbing for me, um, in terms of my father dying alone and people obviously being very uncomfortable and facing death and spending some time with uh, the final moments of someone that they love very dearly. I'm saddened that my father was left to die alone at the very end by friends who could have been a friend at the end. That's why we've created this workshop as a part of Ancestor Gardens to support families and friends who want to be with a dying loved one, who want to be present, who want to be calm, who want to be composed, and want to be able to support someone they've loved their whole life. Be a friend to the end, learn skills to calm anxiety, worry, and stress about death, and learn how to live life to its fullest through being a friend to the end with someone who's dying.